The old pickup truck rumbled down Main Street as the sun began to set behind the mountains. Tom pulled into the grocery store parking lot, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel. At 52, he had seen his share of hard times, but nothing prepared him for what he was about to witness. Behind Miller's grocery store, near the large green dumpsters, he noticed movement. Tom squinted through the dusty windshield and saw a woman with 3 children. They were quietly going through bags of discarded food, carefully examining each item before setting it aside. The woman looked to be in her early 30s, with long brown hair tied back in a ponytail. Her clothes were clean but worn, and she moved with the careful dignity of someone trying to maintain pride in desperate circumstances. The 3 children appeared to be between 6 and 12 years old. The oldest, a girl, helped sort through the food while keeping watch. The middle child, a boy, held tight to his mother's hand. The youngest, another girl, sat quietly on an overturned crate, her big eyes taking in everything around her. Tom's heart sank as he watched the family work together with such practiced efficiency. This wasn't their first time doing this. He could see the mother whispering instructions to her children, teaching them which items were still good and which ones to avoid. The oldest girl found a loaf of bread with only a few moldy spots and carefully tore away the bad parts, dividing the rest among her siblings. He remembered this woman. Her name was Mary, and her husband Jake had worked various jobs around town. Jake had helped Tom once during a particularly difficult cattle roundup when 2 of his regular hands had fallen ill. The man had worked from sunrise to sunset without complaint, refusing to take more than the agreed-upon wage despite working extra hours. Tom had respected that kind of integrity, but Jake had died in a farming accident about 6 months ago. Tom had heard bits and pieces from people in town. Equipment failure, they said. Wrong place at the wrong time. It was the kind of tragedy that could happen to anyone working the land. But that didn't make it any easier for the family left behind. Now, watching Jake's widow and children searching for food in garbage bags, Tom felt a familiar ache in his chest. He knew what it was like to lose everything that mattered. When his own wife Rebecca had died from cancer 8 years ago, he had nearly lost the ranch. The medical bills, the grief, the inability to focus on work. It had almost destroyed him. If not for the kindness of neighbors and the community rallying around him, he would have lost everything. Tom sat in his truck for a long moment, unsure of how to approach. He didn't want to embarrass the family or make their situation worse. Pride was often the only thing people had left in situations like this, and he understood that completely. The youngest girl looked up and caught sight of his truck. She tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed in his direction. Mary looked up, her face flushing with shame and fear. Tom could see her calculating whether to run or stay. Her protective instincts were clearly warring with exhaustion and desperation. He made his decision. Tom turned off the engine and slowly got out of the truck, making sure his movements were calm and non-threatening. He walked over to the family, removing his hat as he approached. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently. "I don't mean to bother you, but aren't you Jake Wilson's wife?" Mary straightened up, her chin lifting with defensive pride. "Yes, I am. Is there something you need?" "I'm Tom Harrison. I own the Double H Ranch about 10 miles north of here. Your husband helped me out during roundup season a couple years back. He was a good man, and I was real sorry to hear about what happened." The children moved closer to their mother, sensing the tension in the air. Mary's eyes darted between Tom and the bags of food, clearly mortified at being caught in this situation. "Jake always spoke well of you, Mr. Harrison," she said quietly. "He said you were fair and honest." Tom nodded, then looked around at the children. "These must be your kids. Jake used to talk about them all the time when we were working. Couldn't stop bragging about how smart they were." The oldest girl, who had been watching Tom with suspicious eyes, seemed to soften slightly at this mention of her father. The boy stepped a little closer to his mother's side, while the youngest continued to stare at Tom with curiosity. "We should be getting home," Mary said, starting to gather up the few items they had found. "It's getting late." Tom could see the shame burning in her cheeks, the way she avoided making eye contact. He recognized the look of someone who had been proud their whole life and was now reduced to circumstances they never imagined possible. "Mrs. Wilson, I wonder if I might have a word with you," Tom said carefully. "I've got something I'd like to discuss, and it might be of interest to you." Mary paused in her gathering, looking at him with wariness and hope warring in her expression. What kind of something? Well, it's a business proposition, actually. But maybe we could talk somewhere more comfortable. How about we go over to the diner? I'll buy you and the kids some supper and we can talk properly. Mr. Harrison, I appreciate the offer, but I don't need charity, Mary said, her voice firm despite the obvious exhaustion in her eyes. No, ma'am, I wouldn't insult you with charity. Like I said, this is business. I've got a problem that needs solving, and I think you might be the person to help me solve it. The children looked up at their mother hopefully. Tom could see they were hungry, really hungry, in a way that went beyond just missing a meal or two. The youngest girl's clothes hung loose on her small frame, and all three children had that hollow look around the eyes that came from not getting enough to eat for too long. Mary looked at her children, then back at Tom. He could see her internal struggle, the battle between pride and desperation, between protecting her dignity and protecting her family's basic needs. What kind of business? She asked finally. The kind best discussed over a hot meal, Tom replied. I promise you, Mrs. Wilson, this isn't about pity or handouts. I've got a legitimate offer to make, but I'd rather explain it properly somewhere we can all sit down and talk. The diner was only a block away, its neon sign flickering in the gathering dusk. Through the windows they could see families eating dinner, the warm glow of the restaurant contrasting sharply with the harsh reality of searching through garbage for sustenance. Mary looked at her children again. The oldest girl nodded slightly, as if giving her mother permission to accept help. It was heartbreaking to see a child so young taking on adult responsibilities, trying to ease her mother's burden by making difficult decisions easier. All right, Mr. Harrison, Mary said finally, but this is business, nothing more. Yes, ma'am, nothing more, Tom agreed, though privately he was already thinking about much more than business. He was thinking about the empty house on his ranch, the silence that had settled over his property since Rebecca died, and the way Jake had talked about his family with such love and pride. As they walked toward the diner, Tom noticed how Mary kept her children close, her hand on the youngest girl's shoulder, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. She was in full protective mode, a mother doing whatever it took to keep her family safe and fed. The bell above the diner door chimed as they entered, and several heads turned to look at the unusual group. Tom nodded to a few people he recognized, his presence seeming to shield the family from curious stares. The hostess led them to a corner booth where they could talk privately. Tom watched as Mary's children looked at the menu with wonder, as if they hadn't seen such abundance in months. The youngest girl whispered something to her mother about whether they could really order anything they wanted. The quiet desperation in that simple question hit Tom harder than any sob story could have. He had made up his mind. Whatever pride Mary had left, whatever obstacles she might put up, he was going to find a way to help this family, not just with a meal or a few dollars, but with something real and lasting. Jake had been there for him when he needed help, and now it was time to return that favor to Jake's family. The waitress came over with glasses of water and a basket of warm rolls. Tom noticed how the children's eyes followed every movement, how they waited for their mother's subtle nod before reaching for the bread. Even in their hunger, they maintained the manners and discipline their parents had taught them. Now then, Tom said, settling back in the booth, let me tell you about my problem, and maybe we can work out a solution that helps us both. Mary sat straight in her seat, her hands folded in her lap, ready to listen but still guarded. Her children ate their rolls slowly, making each bite last, savoring food that most people would take for granted. Tom knew that what he said next would change everything for this family. He also knew that what they said in return would change everything for him too. After 8 years of rattling around alone in his big house, maybe it was time to fill those empty rooms with the sound of children's laughter again. The conversation that was about to begin would be the first step toward healing for all of them. Though none of them knew it yet, all they knew was that a chance encounter behind a grocery store had brought them together. And sometimes that's exactly how the best stories begin. The warm lighting of the diner cast a golden glow over their table as Tom watched Mary's children carefully butter their rolls. He could see the way they savored each bite, making the simple bread last as long as possible. It reminded him of his own childhood during the lean years when his father was building the ranch from nothing. So, Mr. Harrison, Mary said, her voice steady despite the circumstances, what exactly is this business proposition you mentioned? Tom leaned forward slightly, choosing his words carefully. He knew this conversation could go wrong in a dozen different ways. Too much sympathy and she'd walk out. Too little, and she might not take him seriously. He needed to strike exactly the right tone. Well, Mrs. Wilson, I'm going to be straight with you. I'm in a bind, and I think you might be the solution to my problem. The oldest girl looked up from her roll, listening intently while trying to appear like she wasn't. Tom noticed how protective she was of her mother, how her young eyes held wisdom that came from taking on responsibilities no child should have to carry. My ranch has been running itself into the ground since my foreman retired last spring, Tom continued. Old Pete had been with me for 15 years, knew every inch of the property, every head of cattle. But he's 82 now and needed to move closer to his daughter in Phoenix. Mary nodded, waiting for him to get to the point. The waitress came by and took their order. Tom insisted they get whatever they wanted, and he could see the children's eyes light up when their mother finally agreed to let them order real meals. The thing is, Tom went on, I'm terrible with paperwork. Always have been. Rebecca used to handle all the books, the scheduling, the correspondence with buyers. She had a gift for organization that I definitely don't have. At the mention of his late wife, Tom's voice softened slightly. Mary's expression showed understanding. She recognized the pain of loss in his words. Since she's been gone, I've been trying to manage everything myself, and I'm making a mess of it. My records are scattered, bills are getting paid late, and I can't keep track of which cattle are ready for market and which aren't. Last month, I nearly sold a pregnant heifer because I couldn't read my own handwriting on the breeding charts. The middle child, a boy who looked to be about 8, giggled softly at this image. Tom smiled at him, then continued his explanation. I need someone who can bring order to the chaos, someone who understands hard work and isn't afraid of taking on a big challenge. I need someone to manage the books, coordinate with the veterinarian and the feed suppliers, keep track of the breeding schedules, and generally run the business side of things while I handle the cattle and the land. Mary was listening carefully now, her initial wariness giving way to genuine interest. That sounds like a full-time job, Mr. Harrison. It is, which is why it comes with full-time pay and benefits. I'm talking about a real position, Mrs. Wilson, not some made-up job to help you out. I genuinely need someone with your skills. My skills? Mary looked surprised. Mr. Harrison, I don't have any special training in ranch management. Maybe not, but Jake told me you handled all the finances for your family. He said you could stretch $1 further than anyone he'd ever met, and that you never missed a payment or forgot a bill. He also mentioned that you worked at the bank for a while before the kids were born. Mary blushed slightly. That was just part-time bookkeeping. Nothing fancy. Bookkeeping is exactly what I need. Plus, Jake said you were the one who figured out how to get the best prices when you were selling your crops. He said you could negotiate with buyers and suppliers better than men who'd been doing it for 20 years. The food arrived, and Tom watched as Mary made sure her children had everything they needed before taking her first bite. Even in her current situation, she was still putting her family first. It was exactly the kind of character he was looking for. There's something else, Tom said after the waitress had left. The job comes with housing. There's a foreman's house on the property that's been empty since Pete left. It's a good-sized place, 3 bedrooms, full kitchen, sitting room. It needs some work, but it's solid and comfortable. The youngest girl looked up at her mother with hope shining in her eyes. The boy stopped eating for a moment, as if afraid that paying too much attention to the conversation might somehow make the offer disappear. Mary set down her fork and looked directly at Tom. Mr. Harrison, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I need to be honest with you. We lost our house 6 months ago. The bank foreclosed after Jake died. We've been living in a trailer park on the outskirts of town, and even that's getting harder to afford. I have $47 to my name, and I haven't been able to find steady work because I need to be available when the children get home from school. Tom admired her honesty. In his experience, people who were straight about their problems were usually the most trustworthy when it came to solving them. Mrs. Wilson, I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a job that I genuinely need filled. Yes, the timing works out well for both of us, but that doesn't make it any less real. What about the children? Mary asked. I can't take a full-time position if it means leaving them unsupervised. Well, that's another advantage of the housing arrangement. They'd be right there on the ranch with you. During school hours, you'd have full focus for the work. When they get home, you'd be available for them. And in the summers, well, ranch kids learn responsibility early. There are always age-appropriate chores that need doing. The oldest girl perked up at this. What kind of chores? Tom smiled at her enthusiasm. All sorts of things. Feeding chickens, collecting eggs, helping in the garden, brushing down the gentler horses. Nothing dangerous, just good honest work that teaches you about taking care of things. I know how to take care of things, the girl said seriously. I take care of my brother and sister when Mom's looking for work. The simple statement hit Tom like a punch to the chest. This child, who couldn't be more than 11 or 12, was already carrying adult responsibilities. It was both heartbreaking and impressive. I can see that, Tom said gently. You're doing a fine job of it too. But maybe it's time for you to be a kid for a while, and let the adults handle the grown-up worries. Mary was quiet for a long moment, cutting her meatloaf into small pieces as she thought. Tom could see the wheels turning in her head, weighing the pros and cons, looking for the catch that surely had to exist. What's the pay? She asked finally. Tom named a figure that was fair for the work but generous considering the housing and the circumstances. Mary's eyes widened slightly. It was more than she had been making at her last job, and that had been before Jake died and the medical bills started piling up. That includes health insurance for all of you, Tom added. And the kids would go to school in Millerville, which has a better school system than here in town. The boy looked up at this news. Better how? Smaller classes, more individual attention from teachers, better equipment, and they have a good sports program if you're interested in that kind of thing. I like baseball, the boy said shyly. Well, Millerville Elementary has one of the best little league programs in the county. My neighbor's grandson plays on the team. Mary was still thinking, still looking for the downside. Mr. Harrison, this sounds too good to be true. Why would you offer all this to someone you barely know? Tom sat back in his seat, considering how to answer that question honestly without sounding like he was pitying them. Mrs. Wilson, I've been alone on that ranch for 8 years now. The house is too big, too quiet, too empty. I eat most of my meals standing over the kitchen sink, and I go days without talking to another human being except when I'm doing business in town. That's not living, that's just existing. He paused, looking at each of the children in turn, then back at Mary. Your husband did me a good turn when I needed help, and he never asked for anything in return. He was the kind of man who helped because it was the right thing to do. Now his family needs help, and I'm in a position to provide it. Maybe that's just how things are supposed to work. But what if it doesn't work out? Mary asked. What if I'm not good at the job, or the children don't adjust well, or we just don't fit in? Then we'll figure something else out, Tom said simply. But Mrs. Wilson, with respect, what you're doing now isn't working out either. And winter's coming. That trailer you're living in isn't going to be warm enough when the snow starts falling. The truth of this statement hung in the air between them. Mary looked at her children, who had finished their meals and were now sitting quietly, waiting for their mother to make a decision that would affect all their lives. The youngest girl tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mama, she whispered, I'm tired of being cold at night. That simple statement seemed to break through Mary's last reservations. Tom could see the moment when her pride stepped aside and her maternal instincts took over. When would you need an answer? She asked. How about this? Tom said. Why don't you and the children come out to the ranch tomorrow afternoon? Take a look at the house, see the property, get a feel for what the job would involve. Then you can make your decision with all the facts. Mary nodded slowly. That seems fair. Good. I'll pick you up at 2 o'clock if that works for you. As they prepared to leave the diner, Tom paid the check and helped Mary gather her children. The old pickup truck bounced along the dirt road leading to the Double H Ranch, carrying Mary and her 3 children toward what might be their new home. Tom drove slowly, partly to avoid the worst of the potholes and partly to give them time to take in their surroundings. Look at all the horses, the youngest girl exclaimed, pressing her face against the passenger window. In the distance, a small herd of quarter horses grazed peacefully in a fenced pasture, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Those are my neighbor's horses, Tom explained. Mine are mostly cattle, but I keep a few horses for working the herds. Do any of you know how to ride? The children shook their heads, but their eyes were bright with interest. Mary sat quietly in the front seat, taking in the vast expanse of grassland, the distant mountains, and the sense of space and freedom that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. It's so quiet, she murmured. Too quiet? Tom asked, suddenly worried that the isolation might be overwhelming for someone used to town living. No, Mary said with a small smile. It's perfect. The foreman's house came into view as they rounded a bend in the road. It was a modest two-story structure with white wooden siding and a wraparound porch. The paint was peeling in places and the garden was overgrown with weeds, but the bones of the house were solid and welcoming. It needs some work, Tom said apologetically as he parked the truck. Pete wasn't much for maintenance in his last few years, and I've been too busy to keep up with it properly. Mary stepped out of the truck and looked around with the eye of someone who had learned to see potential rather than problems. The foundation looks good, she said. And those are fruit trees in the back, aren't they? Apple and cherry? Yes, though they haven't been pruned in a few years. Rebecca used to make the best apple pie from those trees. The children ran ahead to explore the porch, their voices echoing with excitement as they discovered a porch swing and a collection of wind chimes that filled the air with gentle music. Inside, the house was dusty but spacious. The living room had large windows that let in plenty of natural light, and there was a stone fireplace that would provide warmth during the cold winter months. The kitchen was simple but functional, with enough room for a family to eat together comfortably. 3 bedrooms upstairs, Tom said as they climbed the narrow staircase. The master bedroom has its own bathroom.
And there's another full bathroom in the hall for the kids. The oldest girl claimed the room that looked out over the pastures,
while the younger 2 argued good-naturedly over which of the remaining bedrooms had the better view of the mountains. They like it, Mary observed, watching her children explore their potential new home with enthusiasm she hadn't seen from them in months. What about you? Tom asked. Can you see yourself living here? Mary walked to the master bedroom window and looked out over the ranch. In the distance, she could see Tom's main house, a larger structure that sat on a slight rise about a quarter-mile away. It was close enough to feel connected, but far enough to maintain privacy. It's beautiful, she said honestly, but Mr. Harrison, I need to be clear about something. I've never managed anything bigger than a household budget and a small family farm. What if I can't handle the responsibility? Then you'll learn, Tom said simply. Mary, I've been watching you with your children. You've kept them fed, clothed, and educated despite impossible circumstances. You've maintained their health and their spirits when most people would have fallen apart. If you can do all that, you can learn to manage a ranch operation. 2 weeks later, the Wilson family moved into the foreman's house. Tom helped them load their few possessions into his truck, and Mary was embarrassed by how little they owned. Everything they had fit easily in the back of the pickup with room to spare. We travel light, she said with forced cheerfulness, trying to hide her embarrassment at their meager belongings. Rebecca always said that the best homes aren't about what you own, but about who you share them with, Tom replied, and Mary felt grateful for his kindness. The first few days were a whirlwind of adjustment. Tom walked Mary through the ranch's financial records, which were indeed a complete mess. Receipts were stuffed into shoeboxes, breeding records were scrawled on scraps of paper, and some important documents seemed to have disappeared entirely. How have you been managing your taxes? Mary asked, staring at the chaos spread across the kitchen table of the main house. Very poorly, Tom admitted. I think I may have overpaid by thousands of dollars last year, but I can't prove it because I can't find half the deductible expenses. Mary rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She created filing systems, organized receipts by category and date, and began the tedious process of reconstructing the ranch's financial history. It was painstaking work, but she found she enjoyed the challenge of bringing order to the chaos. Meanwhile, the children began to find their place in their new environment. The oldest girl, whose name was Rose, threw herself into helping with the household chores and began reading everything she could find about ranch management. The middle child, David, was fascinated by the cattle and spent hours watching them graze, asking Tom endless questions about their behavior and care. Little Annie, the youngest, quickly became friends with the barn cats and appointed herself their official caretaker. She could be found most afternoons in the barn, making sure each cat had fresh water and talking to them about her day at their new school. The school in Millerville was indeed better than their previous one. The teachers were more attentive, the facilities were newer, and the children began to thrive in ways Mary hadn't seen since before Jake's death. Rose joined the school's junior leadership program, David made the baseball team, and Annie discovered a talent for art that her previous teachers had never noticed. But not everything was smooth sailing. About a month after they moved to the ranch, Mary overheard a conversation at the grocery store in town that made her blood run cold. "I don't know what Tom Harrison is thinking," one woman whispered to another as they stood in the produce aisle, taking in that Wilson woman and her children like that. "People are starting to talk." "What kind of talk?" the second woman asked. "Well, you know, a widower and a widow living so close together, her working in his house every day. It doesn't look proper if you ask me." Mary felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. She had been so grateful for Tom's help that she hadn't considered how others might interpret the situation. The gossip continued behind her as she finished her shopping, each whispered word cutting deeper than the last. That evening, after the children were in bed, Mary walked across the pasture to Tom's house. She found him on his back porch reading the local newspaper and drinking coffee. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. Tom looked up, immediately sensing the tension in her voice. "What's wrong?" Mary repeated what she had overheard at the store, watching as Tom's expression grew darker with each word. "Mary, I don't give a damn what those old biddies think," he said when she finished. "You're doing an excellent job. The children are happy and healthy, and that's all that matters." "But it does matter, Tom," Mary said, using his first name for the first time. "It matters because it affects you and it affects my children. Rose is at an age where she's starting to notice these things. What if the other kids at school start saying things?" Tom set down his coffee cup and stood up. "Then we'll deal with it when it happens. Mary, you can't live your life based on what small-minded people might say." "Easy for you to say," Mary replied, her voice rising slightly. "You're not the one they're calling a gold digger or worse. You're not the one whose children might suffer because their mother's reputation is being questioned." The hurt in her voice was evident, and Tom felt a surge of anger toward the gossips who had put that pain there. "What are you saying, Mary? Are you thinking about leaving?" Mary wrapped her arms around herself, looking out over the dark pastures. "I don't know what I'm saying. I just know that I can't be the cause of people talking badly about you. You've been nothing but kind and generous, and you don't deserve to have your reputation damaged because of us." Tom moved closer, careful not to invade her personal space but wanting her to see the sincerity in his eyes. "Mary, listen to me. In the months since you've been here, the ranch has run smoother than it has in years. The books are organized, the bills are being paid on time, and I actually know which cattle are ready for market. You've brought efficiency and order to an operation that was slowly falling apart." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But more than that, you've brought life back to this place. I hear the children's laughter when I'm working in the pastures, and it reminds me what I've been missing all these years. This ranch was meant to have a family on it, and for the first time since Rebecca died, it feels like home again." Mary felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Tom, I'm grateful for everything you've done for us, more grateful than I can ever express. But I won't let that gratitude destroy your standing in the community. My standing in the community will survive a few old women with nothing better to do than gossip," Tom said firmly. "But I'm not sure I'll survive losing the best thing that's happened to this ranch in 8 years. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the night air filled with the sounds of crickets, and winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a fury that caught everyone off guard. By November, the temperatures had already dropped below freezing, and the weather forecasts warned of a major storm system moving in from the west. Mary stood at the kitchen window of the main house, watching the darkening sky with concern. She had been working on the ranch's quarterly tax reports when the wind began howling through the eaves, rattling the windows and sending dead leaves swirling across the yard. "Looks like we're in for a big one," Tom said, coming in from the barn with snow already dusting his shoulders. "I just heard on the radio that they're predicting 18 inches, maybe more, with winds up to 60 miles per hour. Mary felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in her stomach. In their old life, bad weather had meant potential disaster. Power outages they couldn't afford to have repaired, heating bills they couldn't pay, and the constant worry about keeping the children warm and safe. "What do we need to do to prepare?" she asked, already mentally cataloging the supplies they had on hand. "Well, the good news is that both houses have backup generators, and we've got plenty of firewood stacked. The bad news is that I've got 30 head of pregnant cattle in the north pasture, and if this storm is as bad as they're predicting, I'll need to get them moved to the shelter near the barn." Tom pulled off his work gloves and warmed his hands by the fireplace. "Problem is, it's a 2-person job at minimum, and my usual hands are helping their own families prepare for the storm." What about the children? Mary asked. Should I send them to stay with someone in town until this passes? No need for that. They'll be safer here than anywhere else. These old houses have weathered plenty of storms over the years. Tom paused, looking at Mary thoughtfully. Actually, I was wondering if you might be willing to help me with the cattle. I know it's not part of your usual duties, but… Of course I'll help, Mary interrupted. What do I need to do? Tom smiled, not surprised by her quick agreement. In the months since she had arrived, Mary had consistently proven herself willing to tackle whatever challenges arose, whether they were in her job description or not. Mostly, you'll need to help me guide them toward the shelter. Cattle are smart, but they can be stubborn when they're scared. Having someone positioned at the right spots to keep them moving in the right direction makes all the difference. By noon, the snow was falling heavily, and the wind was strong enough to make walking difficult. Mary bundled up in borrowed winter gear, heavy boots, insulated coveralls, and a thick wool cap that Tom had found in his closet. Stay close to me, Tom shouted over the howling wind as they made their way toward the north pasture. If we get separated in this, just head back to the barn and wait for me there. The cattle were huddled together near the fence line, their bodies steaming in the cold air. They looked miserable and anxious, sensing the approaching danger of the storm. Mary could see why Tom was worried. If they stayed out in the open during the worst of the weather, some of them might not survive. We'll work them slowly toward the gate, Tom explained, his voice muffled by the wind and his heavy scarf. Don't make any sudden movements and try to stay calm. They can sense fear, and scared cattle make poor decisions. Mary positioned herself where Tom indicated, spreading her arms wide to create a visual barrier that would encourage the cattle to move in the desired direction. The first few animals were reluctant to leave their huddle, but gradually, the herd began to move toward the shelter. Everything was going smoothly until one of the younger bulls decided he didn't want to cooperate. Instead of following the rest of the herd, he broke away and started heading back toward the far corner of the pasture. Tom moved quickly to intercept him, but the footing was treacherous in the deepening snow. Mary watched in horror as Tom slipped and fell hard, his left leg twisting beneath him at an unnatural angle. "Tom!" Mary shouted, abandoning her position and running toward him. "I'm all right," Tom called back, trying to get to his feet. But when he put weight on his left leg, he immediately collapsed again with a sharp cry of pain. Mary reached him just as the wayward bull decided to rejoin the herd on his own. "Don't try to move," she said, kneeling beside Tom in the snow. "Let me see how bad it is." Even through his heavy pants, Mary could see that Tom's ankle was already swelling badly. When she carefully probed the area, Tom winced and gritted his teeth. "I think it might be broken," Mary said, her medical knowledge limited but her instincts telling her this was serious. "We need to get those cattle to safety first," Tom said through gritted teeth. "They won't survive the night out here." Mary looked at the herd, which had stopped moving when Tom fell and was now milling around uncertainly. Then she looked back at Tom, who was clearly in significant pain but still putting the welfare of his animals first. "Tell me what to do," she said. "Mary, you can't handle 30 head of cattle by yourself. It's too dangerous." "Tom, look around. There's nobody else here, and this storm isn't waiting for a better time. Now tell me what I need to do to get these animals to safety." Tom stared at her for a moment, seeing the determination in her eyes. He had known Mary was strong, but this was the first time he had seen the full extent of her courage and resolve. "All right," he said, "but you have to promise me that if things go wrong, you'll get yourself to safety. These cattle aren't worth risking your life over." "Understood. Now what's the plan?" Working together despite his injury, Tom coached Mary through the process of herding the cattle. She moved carefully but confidently, using her voice and body position to guide the animals toward the shelter. It was slow work, and the storm was getting worse by the minute, but gradually the herd began to move in the right direction. "That's it," Tom encouraged from his position on the ground. "Keep them bunched together. Don't let any stragglers break away." Mary felt a surge of pride as the cattle finally entered the large shelter near the barn. She had never imagined herself capable of managing such large, powerful animals, but somehow she had found the confidence to do what needed to be done. With the cattle safely sheltered, Mary turned her attention back to Tom. The snow was falling so heavily now that visibility was down to just a few yards, and Tom was shivering despite his heavy winter clothing. "We need to get you inside," Mary said. "Can you put any weight on that leg at all?" Tom tried again to stand, but the pain was clearly overwhelming. "I don't think so." "Mary, You're going to have to go get help. Take the truck and drive to the Hendersons' place. Bill Henderson has a snowmobile and he can get back here with medical supplies. Mary looked at the truck, which was already nearly buried in snow, then back at Tom. That truck isn't going anywhere in this weather and you know it. We need to figure out another way. She thought quickly, remembering the layout of the ranch buildings. The main house was only about 200 yards away, but in these conditions it might as well have been 2 miles. Can you hold on to me if I help support your weight? She asked. Mary, I'm 6'2" and weigh 200 pounds. You can't carry me through this storm. I'm not going to carry you, Mary said with a small smile, but I am going to get you home. She disappeared into the shelter and returned a few minutes later with a wheelbarrow that had been stored there for feeding the cattle. You can't be serious, Tom said, but Mary was already lining the wheelbarrow with horse blankets. It's either this or you freeze to death while I try to find help that probably can't reach us anyway, Mary said practically. Now stop arguing and help me get you into this thing. The trip back to the house was harrowing. The wheelbarrow was difficult to maneuver in the deep snow, and several times Mary thought she might lose her grip and dump Tom onto the ground. But she kept pushing forward, guided by the faint glow of the house lights through the swirling snow. When they finally reached the back door, both of them were exhausted and half frozen. Mary helped Tom onto the living room couch and built up the fire while he called his doctor on his cell phone. Doc says it's probably a bad sprain rather than a break, Tom reported after describing his symptoms. But he can't get out here to examine it properly until the storm passes. He says to keep it elevated and iced and to call back if the pain gets worse. Mary made hot coffee and soup while Tom settled in with his injured leg propped up on pillows. Outside, the storm raged with increasing intensity. But inside the house, there was a sense of warmth and security that had nothing to do with the fireplace. I called to check on the children, Mary reported. They're fine. Rose is keeping the fire going and they have plenty of food and games to keep them occupied. You did good today, Tom said as Mary handed him a steaming mug of coffee. I've never seen anyone take to cattle herding so naturally. Mary settled into the chair beside the couch. I was terrified the whole time, she admitted. But there wasn't any other choice. That's what courage is, Tom said quietly. Being terrified but doing what needs to be done anyway. The storm continued for 3 days. During that time, Mary split her time between caring for Tom, managing the ranch operations from the house, and checking on the children. She coordinated with the veterinarian by phone, arranged for feed deliveries once the roads were passable, and somehow managed to keep everything running smoothly despite the Che. Spring came to the Double H Ranch with a burst of color and life that seemed to mirror the changes taking place in the hearts of its inhabitants. The apple trees behind the foreman's house were heavy with blossoms. The pastures were green with new grass, and everywhere Mary looked, there were signs of renewal and hope. It had been 6 months since the blizzard that changed everything, and Tom's ankle had healed completely. More importantly, the partnership Mary had finally accepted was proving to be everything Tom had promised and more. The ranch was more profitable than it had been in years. Their cattle were healthy and productive, and the operation ran with an efficiency that impressed everyone who saw it. Mary stood in the main house kitchen, preparing breakfast for what had become their usual morning routine. Tom would arrive shortly to discuss the day's priorities over coffee and eggs, and the children would stop by on their way to catch the school bus for hugs and any last-minute reminders about homework or after-school activities. It was a routine that had developed naturally over the winter months, as the boundaries between employer and employee, between neighbor and friend, had gradually blurred into something deeper and more meaningful. Morning, partner, Tom said as he came through the back door, stamping the morning dew off his boots. The word partner had taken on layers of meaning that went far beyond business, though neither of them had explicitly acknowledged it yet. Morning yourself, Mary replied, pouring him a cup of the strong coffee he preferred. I've got the breeding schedules laid out on the table, and I think you'll be pleased with the projections for this year's calf crop. Tom settled at the kitchen table and reviewed Mary's meticulous charts. Her organizational skills had transformed every aspect of the ranch operation, but it was her intuitive understanding of the cattle and the land that truly impressed him. She had a natural feel for ranching that couldn't be taught. These numbers are incredible, Tom said, looking up from the papers. If we hit these targets, this will be our best year ever. It will be our best year, Mary corrected gently. This is as much your success as mine, Tom. Your knowledge of the land and the cattle, combined with better organization and planning, that's what's making the difference. The sound of children's voices announced the arrival of Rose, David, and Annie, who burst through the door with the energy that only school-aged children possess in the morning. "Mr. Tom," Annie announced importantly, "I lost another tooth last night and the tooth fairy brought me a whole $1. "A whole $1? Tom said with exaggerated amazement. "That's quite a generous tooth fairy you have there," Mary smiled, knowing that Tom had quietly taken over tooth fairy duties months ago, along with a dozen other small parental gestures that the children had come to expect and treasure. "Don't forget," Rose said, shouldering her backpack. "The spring festival planning meeting is tonight. I'm supposed to remind both of you that the whole family is expected to attend." Tom and Mary exchanged glances. The annual Millerville Spring Festival was the community's biggest social event, and this year, Mary had been asked to serve on the planning committee, a clear sign that she was now fully accepted as a community member rather than an outsider. "We'll be there," Mary promised, though she felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect. Community events still felt a bit overwhelming, even though her family had been warmly welcomed since the blizzard incident. After the children left for school, Tom and Mary settled into their daily routine of reviewing ranch business. But today felt different somehow, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with cattle breeding schedules or feed prices. "Mary," Tom said suddenly, setting down his coffee cup, "there's something I need to talk to you about." Mary looked up from her paperwork, noting the serious tone in his voice. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. At least I hope not." Tom ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking nervous. "It's just that I've been thinking a lot lately about us, about this arrangement we have, about the future." Mary felt her heart begin to beat faster. She had been having similar thoughts for weeks but hadn't known how to bring up the subject. "What kind of thoughts?" she asked carefully. Tom stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the pastures where their cattle grazed peacefully. "When I offered you that job last fall, I thought I was solving a practical problem. I needed help with the ranch, and you needed work and a place to live. It seemed like a straightforward business arrangement." He turned back to face her, his expression serious but warm. "But somewhere along the way, it became much more than that. You and the children have brought this place back to life in ways I never expected. This house feels like a home again instead of just a place where I eat and sleep." Mary felt tears gathering in her eyes, though she wasn't sure if they were tears of joy or fear. "Tom," she said softly, "you've given us everything we needed to rebuild our lives. Security, opportunity, a real home. I'll never be able to repay that debt." "That's just it, Mary," Tom said, moving closer to her chair. "I don't want you to feel indebted to me. That's not what this is about anymore, if it ever was." He paused, seeming to gather his courage for what came next. "I love you, Mary. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you've thrown yourself into ranch life, the way you've made my business concerns your own. I love watching you with your children and seeing how you've helped them heal from their loss." Mary's breath caught in her throat. She had hoped, but she hadn't dared to believe that her own growing feelings might be returned. "And I love those children as if they were my own," Tom continued. "Rose with her serious determination to excel at everything she tries. David with his endless curiosity about how things work. Annie with her gentle heart and her way of making everyone around her smile." He knelt beside Mary's chair, taking her hands in his. "What I'm trying to say is that I don't want to be your business partner anymore. I want to be your life partner. I want us to be a real family, not just people who live and work together." Mary looked into Tom's eyes and saw everything she had been afraid to hope for reflected there. Love, commitment, the promise of a future built together. "Tom," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I love you too. I've been falling in love with you for months, but I was so afraid that it was gratitude getting confused with something deeper." "And now?" Tom asked. "Now I know the difference," Mary said with certainty. "I love your gentleness with the children, the way you've never made them feel like burdens or obligations. I love your integrity, the way you treat everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. I love your dedication to this land and these animals, and the way you've welcomed us into that dedication." Tom lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. "Mary Wilson, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to your children and a husband to you?" Before Mary could answer, the sound of voices outside announced the unexpected return of the children. They had apparently missed the school bus and come back to get a ride to town. "We'll finish this conversation later," Mary whispered, but the smile on her face told Tom everything he needed to know about her answer. The children burst through the door full of apologies and explanations, but they stopped short when they saw Tom kneeling beside their mother's chair, both adults looking emotional and slightly flustered. "Is everything okay?" Rose asked with the protective instincts of an eldest child who had learned to worry about adult problems. Tom and Mary looked at each other, then back at the children. There would never be a perfect time for this conversation, and maybe this impromptu moment was exactly right. "Actually," Mary said, "Mr. Tom has something he'd like to ask all of us." Tom cleared his throat, suddenly more nervous about asking 3 children than he had been about asking their mother. "Well," he began, "I've just asked your mother to marry me, but I realize that's really a question for all of you. This ranch, this family, it only works if everyone is happy with the arrangement." Annie bounced on her toes with excitement. "Does that mean you'd be our new daddy?" "If that's what you'd like," Tom said gently. "I'd be honored to be your father if you'll have me." David, ever practical, had questions. "Would we still live in our house or would we move to your house?" "We'd figure out what works best for everyone," Tom replied. "Maybe we'd renovate one of the houses to make it bigger, or maybe we'd build something new. What do you think would be best?" Rose, the most cautious of the 3, studied Tom's face carefully. "You really love our mom? This isn't just because you feel sorry for us?" Tom met her direct gaze with equal seriousness. "Rose, I love your mother more than I thought it was possible to love someone again. And I love you and David and Annie because you're part of her, but also because you're each special and wonderful in your own right. And you won't leave us?" Annie asked, the question revealing the deep fear that still lingered from losing her father. "I will never leave you," Tom promised solemnly. "Not ever. That's what marriage means. It's a promise to stay together through good times and hard times, through everything life can throw at us." Rose looked at her mother, then at David and Annie, then back at Tom. As the eldest, she had appointed herself the family's protector, and her approval would carry significant weight with the younger children.